Hello and welcome to another episode of Casual Friday. I'm here with the Duck, and I'm hoping this show isn't a security don, because it seems to be a broad church as to what qualifies nowadays. So I guess we'll find out soon enough, right?
Yeah, once we get fined, we find out, basically.
Yeah, regulation by litigation. Excellent. Before we get into the weeds, show is brought to you by WooX. Links available in the description below, especially the long form article. I'd recommend you read that. There are a lot of educational resources there, even if you don't want to use the exchange, totally cool with us. If you do, you can try it out via the link below. $100 gets you 2 weeks of the zero fee trading. And look, if Don can get on their leaderboard, how hard can it be, really? So worth clicking around, and you might end up there by accident, given the standard, it seems. I'm joking, Don. That was a very impressive return. I actually felt bad for the other guy, Autism Ventures, because other people were saying, oh, look, he's got like a lower P&L with, a much bigger account size, L ratio, look at his Sharpe ratio, etc. I'm like, give the guy a break, That just seems so unnecessarily cruel. But yeah,
Yes.
congratulations on this feat and achievement. I'll ask you, I'll poke and prod you with questions about it once we do the market stuff, but well done.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I mean, I was just basically, I mean, this sounds dumb, right? Because people have been upset at me for saying this, but this has been like a fun project for me. Because I cannot really trade leverage anymore in Germany. Like I can do spot leverage trading, which this was, but once you do like bigger size, it just doesn't work anymore. You get problems with liquidity, especially if you trade altcoins, right? Like altcoins flat out, it's just very, very difficult. Um, so I was just like, I'm gonna put like a little bit of money there, see if I can still do it because I haven't done it in a while, and looks like I can still do it somewhat. Lucky streak, I would say.
Ever humble for a change. You got to have the yin and the yang. In any case, and I will again ask you, because you mentioned on stream you're being quite cryptic, like there are things I don't want to talk about, and then your bio says you're a vaxxed matrix agent, so I'm getting slowly worried of whether you're compromised or not, but we'll get around to it. The conditions that facilitated a lot of that trading look quite interesting. Just looking at the market now, I've got the BTC weekly chart open, and it looks like it wants to close as some sort of spiky double bottom looking thing, unless we get some weekend price action to the contrary. What do you think of this? I mean, I'm not going to talk about the monthly because I think it's, it's not at support, not at resistance, and we
Yeah.
burn like 2-3 minutes of the show every single time making that point. So I think it's worth skipping. But the weekly, I mean, technically it's not at like super support or super resistance either. But at least you've got like a potential spike setup forming, and I think that's complemented by the fact that the potential spike setup is forming at an important level, kind of generally, but also with the specific news that's sort of driving that move, right?
Yes.
And so I've sort of on Monday markets I had these three kind of rules. If I want to buy something, it has to be one of the three, or maybe they're not mutually exclusive. It's hit something, reclaim something, or spike something. Very straightforward kind of framework for getting long. And this looks like it would meet the spike something criterion if the weekly close kind of looks like this. Do you have any other color on the weekly time frame? I mean, we know that the bigger levels that we've discussed on Technical Roundup are sort of 22, 24, whatever, the bigger breakout level. But if this starts to kind of soak up and look how it's looking now, is this good enough on the weekly to risk on further?
I have like this little thing in my head, which basically like it's very bipolar for me because it is support. It's a really shitty support. So I go from like I hate these kind of levels because you go from, oh, this looks great, um, and then it goes up and you're like, oh shit. It didn't go up as far or as fast as I wanted to, so now it looks like shit. And you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, over and over and over again. Um, I don't necessarily like the look of the chart, but it's not a terrible one. And like you said, given the news, it's not like this is like looking bad. You would expect the market to be much, much lower. Um, so yeah, I don't know what is honestly the answer right now. Like I closed my positions like I think yesterday or the day before. Um, because I just don't know. Like it's testing a support, like a really shitty support that it has tested before for the like fourth time on the weekly. If you look at like this kind of like wick that we've been like prodding around, like around 26K, 26.4. Like we've been sitting on 26.4 for an awfully long time. I don't like that. But also we should have broken it given the news. So it's kind of like just looking at the chart, I would say this wants to go lower. considering that we had terrible news and they didn't break the price down, that would kind of suggest that it wants to go higher, and having that kind of like both of them at the same time just makes it really hard to trade, because you can go from one to the other, right? And this is how you get chopped up if you just jump back forth between those two reasonings, because they're both valid, I think.
Yes.
And so yeah, I've just decided to sit this one out until it makes more sense to me. I did get the bottom of the squeeze basically, and that was like a nice trade, but now it's too complicated and not clear enough for me.
It's one of those
Especially
TA looks bad, but it should look worse type of arguments. Is that what you're
exactly,
saying?
yes. And especially given, like, honestly, and then you have with the it should look worse, the S&P's been going up, right? So you could also argue it should be looking much better. So it's this kind of weird thing where you have some arguments for this looks much better than it should, and then other arguments where it looks much worse. And in those kind of circumstances, you either have big conviction in whatever you're trading, and you're just like, I mean, this has to go up because crypto has to go up, or you just stay out. And for me, that's right now, that's to stay out, but it could change drastically just based on like a few candles, like a few daily candles could change that very quickly.
Yeah, there is something ideologically attractive about being like, this is the biggest, most sort of centrally planned attack on our wonderful, not so wonderful industry, and I'm going to ideologically be long into the FUD. And, the people who are selling because of the US government, give me your coins, you don't deserve them anyway, and so on and so forth. Like, those
Yeah.
types of things do well on Twitter, but actually trading that idea and putting your own capital at risk is obviously a bit trickier. So essentially, on the pro side, you have harshest enforcement action and no, like, mega breakdown yet. And on the con side, you have S&P. We didn't track that at all, and it's now hitting resistance.
Yep.
Plus, the leverage portion of the squeeze has played out, right?
Yep.
And I think when I say that the leverage portion of the squeeze has played out, at this point, I think you just need to get spot buyers coming in if they want this piece, because essentially, if you look at the open interest, I've got a Coinalyze Bybit perps open at the moment. Like, open interest just did a full retrace off of the dump, like the pump and dump that we had, or the dump and pump in this case. It basically completely reset open interest back inside the range where it was previously, and all of that aggression has been flushed, right? There's kind of no one left on the obvious low hanging fruit perp side to squeeze higher, unless they start building up, over the weekend or something like that. But the
Yeah.
brunt of that move, the one where insiders speculated, and then late traders pile into that same news, and then they get squeezed, and so on and so forth. Like that's done. At least the straightforward portion of that is done. So I don't think bulls have that in their ammo anymore. Now that that's finished, you want to see, spot sort of perp liquidations plus spot coming in to buy, right? It's like a two-part process. But we've had the massive sort of reversion in the open interest, sort of back where it started, classic BART thing. But no one's coming in to push it further,
Yep.
and that's why the market's at kind of equilibrium, essentially. Lots of aggressive positioning one way, that aggressive positioning gets squeezed, and the market just floats back to almost exactly the middle of the entire pump and dump move, right? Or where it was in the first place. So I think that evidence at least supports the idea that the straightforward portion of any short squeeze that leg is done. And it's the one we wrote about in Technical Roundup as well, where the target for the bounce was essentially just retrace the chunk of open interest, and it did that exactly. And it's no surprise, I think, that conditions have been bit crap and choppy ever since that full retrace, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's been, even if you look at that move, that dump and pump that we had afterwards, like, it's not really been moving that much. Volatility is very low, and I mean, I've been talking about this, that I expect it to kind of slow down, and it has. To be honest, I'm getting really tired of it, and I think it could get much worse. Honestly, like, just looking at how the latest stages of 2018 played out, and how we had ranges of $10 back then. Um, uh, Price is higher now, roughly like 4 times back, like, than it was back then. So maybe we get like $40 ranges in a day. Wouldn't be surprised, honestly, and that is gonna be agonizing. Um, but we kind of have to go through it, I think. Or the S&P just does something completely crazy. I don't think crypto necessarily is going to make a move on its own in the near future. Like if the S&P dumps, I think we're gonna dump. If the S&P breaks through the resistance, it's probably gonna follow suit.
We'll go up like 2%.
Yep, and then retraces the moment like S&P has one red 5-minute candle, retrace everything.
On the daily, yeah. That
But
has been
yeah,
the story of macro, though, right?
oh, it's
Like
been
we're joking about
horrendous.
it, but essentially, huge bounce in risk assets, and crypto is just too radioactive to take part in that. So we're forced to. The best we can do is squeeze like insiders trading with leverage. But in terms of an actual spot bid to push us up or keep us correlated, that's been off the table, and that sucks.
Yeah, I think the only thing that is gonna reverse the damage that's been done to the reputation is basically like a big win against the SEC, and that's basically the XRP play, right? I think that's why you've been seeing in the last few weeks that XRP has been kind of just walking up against Bitcoin, because if that goes wrong and if we generally like the lose cases, then we're gonna have quite a big problem, I think, because we looked at the price, right? As in, like Bitcoin dumped a bunch because of the SEC news, and then Bitcoin recovered a bunch, or like all the altcoins too, basically. But it does cast another shadow on this industry, right? Like when you have Binance insiders literally talk about them kind of like working around the law, like working around regulation and kind of like doing stuff that is highly illegal. Um, After having FTX blow up, after having a bunch of other market participants blow up, like that's still like that adds to kind of the negativity surrounding crypto, and I think that is probably going to take a while to get rid of, especially given that Binance is one of the only ones left, right? Like Binance is where the volume is. Like we had FTX and Binance, then FTX disappeared. Now we have Binance, and now it turns out Binance did some shady shit too. Um, that's a little bit troublesome, and I think that's gonna be another headwind. Like if we see risk going well, I could just see crypto not joining just because people are not ready to touch it yet. Hope I'm wrong on that front, but all in all, like we've gone through quite a bad period of time in crypto, and Bitcoin's at almost 30K. So like we cannot really complain too much. But obviously people that have been holding altcoins and people that have been trading leverage have like not enjoyed their life too much. But I think this kind of shitty environment can stay for quite a while, given how fucked we have ourselves basically with all of this dumb shit that's been happening.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also, maybe it's our 2018 type bias speaking, but I just don't feel like we've had the type of long, agonizing, floor looking consolidation where you'd expect like a cycle shift when you break out of it to take place in BTC yet. Now, that can, of course, happen in a higher range. Doesn't need to be at the dead bottom. But again, you mentioned 2018, like $10 range, huge nuke, and even down there, we ranged for bloody ages, right? And that was like two agonizing ranges, one before a big nuke, one after. In this case, we essentially trended down as the industry was getting liquidated. That sort of summer range was pretty volatile in relative terms, and there was, you could see it on the weekly chart, which is more than you can say for 2018. And then
Yep.
we just, FTX implosion. We spent like what 6-7 weeks, less than 2 months at those lows post FTX, and then we doubled, right?
Yep.
So the idea that we've gone through this, like, yes, in terms of like, I guess depending on the metrics you track, like volume or all the other things we've talked about, you can argue that there's been a lull. But in the same time, we've had meme coin speculation, a bunch of shit going on, and prices basically 2x'd from the bottom and only really ranged for like 6 to 8 weeks at the lows. That's not the type of boring kind of soul-sucking environment that you can, I think, make an analogy with 2018. We're perhaps overdue that, perhaps we're entering that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it. And my base case is that we do see it. Sort of maybe the second half of this year is all that has in store. Obviously, the counter argument is that we're completely wrong about volatility, right? This is the vol bottom or close to it, and essentially you've got DOJ BitMEX style rally where the market just shook it off because it was strong and just started a new trend. I think that's the most hopeful argument. I'm a natural doomer, but I'm less convinced by it than the slow regulatory sort of bullied out chop no new buyers type of argument. We'll have to wait and see. For what it's worth, I'm not saying like, oh, here are two arguments and they're equal. My base case is the more boring, choppy one, but I guess I'd be pleasantly surprised by something else. It's just that the evidence isn't there at the moment, right? The amount of crypto sort of money raised for crypto VC is at like record lows so far in the year. Spot volumes are dead. Market makers are fucking off as well, and it's just not there at the moment. Also, just in terms of technicals, have you like, we're calling this, or I mean, we're technically not, but this is being referred to as a range on the weekly. But I can draw a downward trend line straight through the last like 8 weeks. It's just being walked down at the moment.
Yes, I mean, it's bleeding out. Yeah.
It's bleeding out, yeah. And I covered this on Monday Markets, right? You've just got lower highs and lower lows on the weekly. And it's like, oh, well, the market just hasn't done anything. It's like, I guess I can understand why you're saying that, but it is being walked down on the weekly time frame. And you and I know that these slow walks, they end in, I mean, you get liquidated when they end one way or the other, right? Because it's either, if the market is weak, you have like a sort of gentle walk down and then a final like vertical move lower. Now that one just completely blows you up, but it's usually a good buy, at least in the short to medium term, when you get that acceleration leg. Or you get old school XRP style, sort of bleed out sideways for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then in 2-3 weeks you wipe that out with a candle higher. The sort of classic altcoin type of pattern from back in the day. But in any case, like trading the slow bleed in itself is usually the worst of those options, because if it breaks down, you generally want to be a buyer, at least for a bounce, because you're like, finally, this slow walk is done and the band-aid has been ripped off. Like, that trade is understandable. And then the breakout trade is understandable too, because those things tend to have a lot of momentum when they're wiping out, 8 weeks of downtrend in 1 or 2 weeks, as we've seen before. Those are the better trades, but I think it's, trading wisdom in general is like a crap idea, but one of the good ones is don't fade a boring market type of thing, right? And this is a fundamentally very boring market, and one that's being walked down, and I think you need very good evidence to step in front of it. Maybe we'll get that with this spike failed breakdown thing, but I think, as you said, it's a coin toss because most of the leverage has been flushed out, and we're pretty much back trading at the same prices. So unless like Spot wants to come in and push this higher, then it looks like the weekly kind of dominant short-term trend will be intact. What do you think of the whole, how is this dodgy diagonal going to resolve?
I mean, for me, like, if I just ignore everything else, just look at TA, I mean, this just looks like it wants to basically liquidate people. And I think it wants to liquidate people to the downside, as in, like, we're going to go down. I'm not entirely sure, like, that's why I'm out. But my gut feeling right now, and my gut feeling changes quite quickly when I don't have good technicals and good kind of like reasons for it to be that way. But my gut feeling right now is that we're going to go down. But like I said, that could change. In general, I look at the daily time frame, and I have like a support at 26.3, so 26.3. And I think if we start losing that, it looks really, really bad. And if we start going above 27.5, it starts looking really good. Anything in between there is just kind of complete and utter garbage and isn't worth trading, I think. And I mean, I've been trading utter garbage for the last month, and it's been kind of working. But like, this is getting so bad that I don't think I can make this work. And so I've just been stepping off.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the daily time frame, but essentially it was same kind of walk down, and then the sort of recent price action is the whole dump retrace price action, and beyond that it hasn't really changed anything. It's interesting that all the breakout attempts, and there have been kind of more breakout attempts than breakdown attempts. I think that's fair to say, right?
Yeah.
In this daily range, they've all been getting stuffed, and I think I also agree with your sort of whatever 26-ish, 26.3, 26.4 type of argument, because if the buyback liquidation driven as it may have been from the SEC news, if that low doesn't hold, then no low is going to hold, right?
Yeah. Then I think we go to 23 basically.
Right. Yeah. Like, you need that to be the dead bottom, because if that argument gets taken away from you, that hey, we had the worst FUD ever and we made a low. If that's gone, then both market structure and also just the argument in general is gone as well.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's really it. I mean, on the 4 hour, the range that I mapped out was 26.3 as support and 27.4 as resistance. So like classic, $1,000 range or thereabouts. And the market just hasn't been able to break from it. It's tried, had a break to the upside first, wasn't accepted. The break to the downside was the SEC thing, wasn't accepted, and we're still in that range and trading between the midpoint and the support at the moment. So that's how I'm navigating this at the moment. I'm just like, look, there's been a lot going on, but the 4-hour technicals have been good and they haven't changed. And both efforts to break and both failures to do so are pretty well mapped on there. And even in these conditions, I'm still willing to bet on double fake outs being more rare than not. So wherever the next 4-hour goes, I'm going to expect it to have some legs. And worst case, I get chopped. Whatever. What else is new? So for those of you listening to the ramblings, thinking, oh my god, like you're making bullish arguments, bearish arguments, talking about macro, talking about S&P, like how do I look at this thing? I think your daily levels are good, and then for something faster moving, the 4-hour is good. And it's a rough spot for a strong directional bias, I think, because the boring mechanical portion of the liquidating those breakdown sellers is done. And it seems like once that was done, the market just hasn't had any new catalyst since then, right? So
yeah, it's quite funny because now, like with that candle, like with that daily candle, when we went down and then came back up, you could make the argument like, hey, we should have gone down because this was really bad news. We didn't. But then, given how the daily looks, we should have gone up because that's the best setup you can have, right? Like you wiped out all the people that were short. Like first you wipe out all the longs, then you wipe out all the shorts. You rally right into resistance that we've tested a million times at 27.2. Like that should have gone up, right? So you have the same argument both ways. Like it should have gone down, didn't. It should have gone up, it didn't. So maybe, just maybe, it just should go sideways.
It's at fair value.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. You end up in that whole matrix of like failed breakdowns are bullish, but failed breakdowns are failed to break down the bullish, but or bearish, whatever. At that point, you just lose your mind doing the whole Russian doll routine. So yeah, that's BTC. I don't think I've got anything else to add on that. Pick your fighter, I suppose. ETH. ETH BTC has kind of kept its structure. The one that you sort of pointed out as being this uptrendy daily time frame thing. It's slowed down a little, having reached the previous high. The last 3 or 4 days of price action are slightly less parabolic, but that's been a beacon of strength in the market. As far as ETH USD, there's an interesting divergence there, right? Because the weekly still isn't going to print you anything positive until it closes above 1.9. But then the daily, that divergence that's visible in the ETH BTC chart, you can see that because it didn't break its daily range low, right?
Yeah.
It just kind of tested 1.8 and bounced. And so essentially you have a range between 1.8 and 1.9. And that's the bigger picture, right? If you want to sort of really drill down where the absence of any high time frame conviction is coming from, it's the fact that we have crappy regulatory uncertainty. Like the regulatory environment is probably one of the worst it's ever been, right? The correlations and broader strength of the risk asset is really unfavorable because risk ripped and we've had no part of it. The only bullish argument that you can have is that it should have been a lot worse than it isn't, and that's countered by the fact that it also should have been a lot better given that, and it isn't. And with all that said, the market is trading in $1,000 range. That's probably the best summary I can give for why I sort of look at this thing with some level of contempt at the end of the day. I don't know if you agree or not, but also let's see what you think about the ETH USD daily or weekly or whatever. Because for me, that's really all it comes down to. Like, there's $1,000 range. I look at it. We're still in it. I click off and do something else.
Yeah, I think in general, if you see on the weekly, if we don't go above 1.95, as in 1,950, it's still technically bearish, but it should have broken down, like you said, didn't, whatever. It should have gone up because it didn't break down. It didn't, whatever. Like, this is just garbage, right?
It's so bad, isn't it?
Yeah, and I look at the weekly and I'm like, this is actually not a bad looking chart, right? Given it's pushing into that resistance over and over again. But then I look at the daily time frame, and yes, it's better than Bitcoin, but also it kind of looks like shit to me. Like I look at the ETH USD chart, and it's pushing into 1.8 over and over and over and over again while making lower highs. It just looks like it wants to go below 1.8. And then you have this weird situation where, like, ETH USD on the weekly, again, same kind of story as Bitcoin. Like, that doesn't look that bad. Could go up, but it's still at resistance, right? So technically, if USD at the weekly is like somewhat leaning bearish, and then you have ETHUSD just completely looking shit, in my opinion, anyway. That has to kind of make a new high, which would be 1,910 plus, which at least that's a good invalidation, right? But I think it's much easier to be bearish here than bullish. But also, if BTC has been so strong that like the Bitcoin trade is just easier. Like if you want to be bearish, just be bearish Bitcoin. Even if ETH might go lower, the setup is gonna be cleaner, I think. But yeah, I'm struggling like on both of these pairs, just because you get conflicting info, you get kind of like market structure that's kind of shit, and you get shitty price action on top of it. Like if everything is shit, market is just telling you not to trade, and I've seen too many people lose too much money trading this kind of garbage. Like I know that this is just not. This is just there's nothing there. There's no good setup. There's no good volatility. There's nothing, at least for me. And yeah, like I said, I've been trying the last month to make something happen. Hasn't really happened. So now it's just time to kind of give the market some room. Be fine with missing out the first 10%, because at the end of the day, right, Bitcoin doubled from the lows, and now it's been going sideways, and we're kind of freaking out that we might not get into the 1% range of the local bottom, right? Like just let it do its thing, give you some indication where it actually wants to go, like some clear indication of this garbage on the low time frames that keeps faking out, and then go from there. That's kind of my view on both of these things.
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable, and also quite funny how your idea of "I tried and it failed" is making like a leaderboard run. But that's that aside. And I think in this kind of environment, you need to be really picky with your setups. So even as a filter, like the whole short squeeze type of setup, which we wrote about in the morning in Technical Roundup, we wrote about. You shouted at me and I wrote up because you had high conviction in that, for which I'm grateful, of course. You just want to see people be aggressive at bad prices and something that stands out, like that open interest build up was a real standout thing, right? And then you had some standout news to go with it. And as you said on your Wednesday stream, like there was a lot of context that gave you a directional bias or edge. But on most days, you're in $1,000 range with no such edge or context that sort of nudges you one way or another. So if you don't have those additional filters or some factors of confluence, then you're probably like, how much, you can reverse engineer the question. How much are you going to miss out on by not trading like $1,000 range in sort of BTC, ETH or whatever, right? It's like probably not a lot. And then as you said, even if you miss the first impulse, 5-10%, whatever it may be, given that's gonna signal a shift from low volatility to probably much higher volatility. How much does it matter that you miss out on the first candle, that impulse, the impulse that takes us through the range? Like probably not a lot. Okay, and then you compare that, you sort of factor in the opportunity cost and the likelihood of getting chopped up and losing your money in these conditions. It's just not great, I think, all in all. Do you think on the EPTC point that this could be a lower high or a range high retest type of thing? With all that said, because you were pointing out the bearish market structure on the weekly for some time, or at least like the progressive lower highs that it's making. And now it rallied into the last high, and at least this weekly is a bit on the red side. Do you think this could be it, or I mean, what needs to happen for this to continue? Because I don't really see a world where if we get a bigger breakdown, the EPTC continues to march up the way it has been. I think it's performed well in the chop, but if we start to trend or at least break out, I find that argument slightly harder to support. But that's a bit of a boomer take, so I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd one because chart wise, just it's at the edge of looking good. And I'll just take it for that. But I do agree with you that I would be surprised if ETH does well if Bitcoin breaks up or down. But I know that that's a boomer take, and I know that ETH's been outperforming the entire market, right, for like quite a while now. So I've just kind of like counteracted that gut feeling by just looking at the chart, because I think this has been trading differently for a while now, like different than what you would expect from a normal cycle. And I don't want to make light of that, but I do agree with you. Like it'd be surprising if ETH did well in those circumstances, but also like it's done well for so long that it's kind of like I think it feels copy to be like, it's not going to go up if Bitcoin goes up or if Bitcoin goes down. I'm just going to look at the chart, and the chart right now is not too bad, honestly. The only thing is, like, if you're allocating here, you're basically also bullish Bitcoin, because ETH hasn't really been volatile either, right, against Bitcoin. Like, it's gone up like 1% or 2% every now and then, but at the end of the day, this has been in a range. So if you're bullish ETH, you have to kind of be bullish Bitcoin too. And given I'm not really bullish right now on Bitcoin, it doesn't really make much sense for me to allocate on ETH. And you could make like a pair trade argument and whatever, but do you really want to take a pair trade when something is moving like 0.1 or 0.2%
The
a
fees
day?
alone will just
Yeah, like that funding, that fee, like those fees that you have to pay don't really make that worth it. So it's a tough one. And I'll give it some room, like until I'm back bullish on Bitcoin again. And honestly, it would just take one good daily candle.
yeah.
But I just want to see that one good daily candle because it's been disappointing for a while now. And when it's disappointing for too long, I just want to see a little hint of bullishness again. Because so far it's not broken down yet, right? Like we're still, like Bitcoin is still well above where it was trading for ages, basically. But it's also not gone up. So I just want a little bit of bullishness.
Yeah. And I think we've been quite kind and reasonable to this market, being like, well, just give us a little signal, something on the daily. Like, we want to be on your side, but
Yeah.
you've got to work with us here. And of course, now it doesn't help that even if you end up finally getting your daily signal, you're buying S&P
In
resistance
Yes, into monthly
into
S&P
monthly S&P
resistance.
resistance, and that just fucking sucks. Like we had such a wonderful window of outperformance. Like if you look at the S&P, the last sort of 4 weeks have been up, and broke out from that local range. Same with the Nasdaq. And yes, I concede all the arguments about breadth and which names are going up, and the S&P 490 and all those other things. But in general, if we were trading anything like we were in the past with the tick for tick correlations, or even just more broadly as a risk asset, that would have been more than enough, right? And then we would have
Yes.
hit monthly resistance on BTC while hitting monthly resistance on S&P, and then you can just sell that and fuck off for a while, and that would have been
Yes.
fantastic. But now
Oh, I would love that.
that would have
Yeah.
been so good, right? Even if you get immediately stopped out and all of that, you still feel good about taking that trade. I feel like because
Yeah.
it's just so harmonious. But on this occasion, we don't have that luxury where BTC's remained range bound. The regulatory stuff's only fired up, and now even if you think we're in the clear, then the macro correlation might come back to bite your ass. Given Europe, it's no longer like, oh, we're testing the weekly range high on the S&P for the fourth or fifth time. This is going to be monthly resistance. So even if you're right for a week or two on BTC, that overhang I think is significant.
Yeah. I really don't like being bullish into 4.3K on the S&P.
Yeah, it's
Like
rough, isn't it?
it's the one level that I've been talking about ever since we
Yeah,
reclaimed
you've been obsessed.
3.7. Ever since we reclaimed 3.7K, I've been like, oh, 4.3, 4.3, and then we're gonna range in between those two levels. And then buying into 4.3, like Bitcoin, but still. And then like while I'm expecting a range on the S&P, it just doesn't feel good. Like I absolutely hate it. And this is something that will, like, even if I get a bullish setup on Bitcoin, what I basically have been doing and how I've been trading is like I get a bullish setup, I take it, it goes up, and I look at the S&P or like a million other evidence that, I mean, we are at resistance or we're gonna go down. And I'm just like, I'm fudding myself out of position, and then it nukes, and then I'm just like, oh, but it nuked for a dumb reason because most of these reasons have been dumb, right? And then I'm like, now I can rebuy it again because like there's still a setup there. And then it goes up again. I'm like, well, we're still at 4.3K. I don't want to have that. Like I don't. And this has been kind of like the way I've been kind of like jumping back and forth, back and forth. I've just been playing long only. So I've not been shorting, but that's kind of like been the mental battle that's been going on. Every time it's gone up, I'm just like, why am I holding something while the S&P is at resistance? And every time it dumps, I'm like, this is dumping for such dumb reasons that I just kind of have to buy this dump. And it's been working, but this cannot go on forever.
Yeah.
And the market will have to kind of choose where it wants to go. Um, maybe the S&P surprises us and just breaks through like 4.3 to 4.5 resistance. Like that's a massive resistance, I think, and just goes to make new all-time highs. But I don't want to speculate on that in face of the only real resistance that matters on that chart, in my opinion, anyway. So yeah, might just be a shitty summer, to be honest.
Yeah, that's my base case at least. I feel like technically we've been spoiled, like up 2x from the lows. I feel like that's a really good thing and was a nice rotation. But I'm less sure about just continuing that trend into. I mean, summer is generally quite dull as well, right? You get like summer lull in legacy markets. Everyone fucks off on
Yes.
holiday, and we've had low enough liquidity in the lead up to that in crypto, and we're not following on with the S&P. I'm just like, who are the takers? You know, like who's going to come in and lift this thing?
Yeah,
2x from the lows into summer with every coin they own being a security and trading on a
yeah.
banned exchange or whatever every other day, you know?
I mean, especially given that the bigger people, right, actually have to be a little bit worried now too that they're gonna be the next one on the chopping block, right? Anyone big that moves into this market that isn't a native, as in anyone that has like no exposure that would be buying, is probably gonna be looking at stuff and be like, okay, like if I move in, where do I buy? Probably not Binance, because I mean that's just like they're shutting down Binance US, or like not shutting down, but they're going after it heavily. And then you're like, oh, Coinbase, well, and then you have no good choices, right? And for someone that like obviously you can still buy crypto, and it's not necessarily like you're not, I think, not at risk necessarily. But if you're not in the market already, that is not necessarily something that you will be feeling.
Yes.
If anything, you'll be feeling like, okay, this market's just fucking scamming. Let me just trade Nvidia or like any of the AI shit that goes up
Yes,
5x
yes.
in 1 month, instead of kind of tainting myself by touching something that the USA is basically going after. And like I said, I think that can change if we get some sort of regulatory action, and that needs to come relatively soonish, or we just need to go sideways for long enough for people to forget. One or the other. Otherwise, I'm in the same boat as you. Like, who the fuck is buying this thing? Like, retail might, but honestly, probably not, because AI is so much more interesting on that front. Like, it's easier to hype. It's easier like to get people excited about it. Um, so who's left really? Like, it's a tough one, and I think crypto natives alone um, could probably pump it too, but they have to be made excited for it. And right now, I don't really feel any excitement in the market. So I'm struggling with it too. Like, who the fuck is gonna buy it? Whenever you ask that question, though, it goes up.
Yes, true, true. That said, Don, when the market's bullish, we need to really like work on our bull posting for Casual Friday, because the last few episodes, man, I don't know if you listen. I have to listen to them, you know, replay them to do the
Oh,
timestamps and stuff.
horrendous!
And I'm just
Yeah,
like, why would anyone listen to this? Like, it's, I,
most depressing
it's
shit on the
so
planet.
depressing. I can understand the appeal of the Moon Boys, right, on YouTube, because at least they make you feel fucking good about owning this thing. Now, it could be like bad faith and delusional and self-serving and directionally completely wrong and ultimately harmful, but at least you have this. It's like Plato's cave, right? Like you have this moment of respite where you just feel good and there's like someone on your side and it's like, yeah, everything's gonna be okay. And then you tune into Technical Roundup, no editing, no faces, no hope. That's our new channel logo, you know. But yeah, cool. Okay.
I mean, it will. One thing I can give you, and I mean, it will go back up again. It's just a question of when,
I mean, it
and if we're
doubled,
gonna,
right? Like our industry
yeah,
got liquidated and it doubled. So clearly, it's not completely dead, right?
yeah. I mean, I think we're doing considerably well for what we went through. Like, if you told me 2021, or maybe even 2019, that like everything that happened would happen, I'd be like, crypto's trading, or like especially like Bitcoin is trading at 5K and everything else at zero. And now we're trading at like above 20K, and everything else is not at zero, even though like a lot of the other things are closer to zero now than
Yes.
they've ever been. Um, we're doing quite well considering, but that's not really something that you want to hear if all your neighbors have been getting rich off of AI. and you've been stuck in this shit, not making any money.
Yeah,
But
it's like I love the risk and the volatility of crypto compared to the S&P. Why would I trade that boomer market? And then you look at crypto and you look at tech, and you're like, oh,
yes.
oops. Altcoins, Don. You made a flex tweet of sorts, or at least an in-your-face type of thing, where you said some of the best performing stuff have been that list of coins, of all the boomer coins people make fun of me for, Litecoin, XRP, so on and so forth. Pepe is up 7%, so there's that at least.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, but what do you think of alts in general? Because to be completely honest, I'll scroll through them like on the daily and on the weekly, like the big ones. So my list pretty much goes in alphabetical order, like higher market cap things: ADA, Algo, Ape, Aptos, Arbitrum, Atom, AVAX, BNB, Chili's, Curve, Dogecoin, DOT, DYDX, and so on and so forth. And they all just look shit. Like,
horrendous.
There's just
absolutely
like nothing
garbage.
else to say. You know, I could do the whole 1 hour time frame range. If it reclaims, it'll do this, and here's your midpoint. But like bigger picture, these have just been trending down, and a lot of them have just broken down on the daily as well. Whatever shitty ranges they were holding on to. Like I'm still clicking, and they all still look mostly garbage. And there are some outliers who are at least holding their ranges, like INJ, Lido, Litecoin. I mean, Pepe we said is up. Render as well, but those are like 4 or 5 names on that are slightly newer and lower down in via market cap, and XRP obviously because of a catalyst specific thing. But bigger picture, just clicking through this thing, the strong ones are just barely range bound, and the weak ones have been breaking down for weeks at this point. And so, I saw a little back and forth that you got into in terms of, well, alts have been underperforming. And I think it was our friend Pierre who said, well, it depends what you're looking at. Some of the AI coins have been doing well. But again, in terms of just like the breadth of the market, alts have been shit. And if you've been looking for like general, outside of being able to pick names, if you've been looking for like a like a beta effect by having exposure to top X or some sort of basket or some market cap weight thing, it's just been a fucking awful time, dude. So I just don't like altcoins. I think if you're short term trading this stuff, at least the levels have been good on some of them. The new shiny stuff is barely keeping up. Again, we're at a point where the stuff that's showing relative strength isn't trending up anymore. It's just holding its range as opposed to trending down, right? There's nothing here that makes me terribly excited. Maybe there's some stuff on chain, but even that turned predatory very quickly with liquidity draining meme coin events, and everything else kind of petered out rather soon. So yeah, I don't see strong cases to be playing altcoins here. But maybe we're just boomers. I always go back to that when, given how much of the Twitter chatter and Telegram chatter, etc., is about altcoins, I always have to challenge my assumptions, be like, am I just being a boomer by looking at these things on the daily time frame? Maybe I should be on the hourly or something. But then that's a completely different type of show and strategy and everything else. Like, I think if you just do what I did, that cursory daily, weekly time frame overview of the top whatever alts, you'll just see that they're breaking down. They look like shit. And then, as you mentioned, on the BTC and ETH pair, those like BTC and ETH themselves aren't clear enough, but on the BTC and ETH pair for alts, they look even worse. So I'm not sure what the strong argument looks like.
You just go through the list like you said, and it's all horrible. There's the only ones that are doing well, and this is why I fucking hate whenever I post about altcoins. I get like 100 people in my comments being like, "Oh, but this and this coin went up. Like you're completely wrong." I'm like, dude, there's 10,000 altcoins, and there's 10 that went up in the last few. Like, just shut the fuck up. Just leave me the fuck alone, right? Like it's so stupid, and it's the same with like Pierre's argument with like AI coins. Like that's just one sector of altcoins that is pumping because of a narrative, right? And most of this kind of stuff actually has full retraced already. They did well, and then they kind of petered out over the next few days or weeks. And like the altcoins just generally, and I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to kind of figure this one out. The altcoins in general have been taking a massive beating, and it's been not fun. Like if you just, for example, you look at Link USD, right? That's back at the lows. That's back like as if Bitcoin went back to 15K. And that's one of the crowd favorites, right? You look at Atom, also one of the crowd favorites, also back at the lows, right? Like you can go through the list through almost everything, ADA, whatever, like they're all actually approaching their 2022 or 2023 lows. While Bitcoin is still like Bitcoin is not really down that much from 30K. Altcoins, however, unless you're trading the ones with the narrative, which I've been talking about nonstop, right? I've been like, I mean, if you want to buy something with a narrative. That's why I've been like trading Litecoin. That's why I've been trading XRP, because I knew like Litecoin, the halving narrative, you can make use of that. XRP, the SEC case, like you can kind of trade that way, but those are the only ones that you can touch. And when there's only a few ones that you can touch and everything else is complete garbage and it's going to burn the shit out of you if you touch it, I would call that altcoins not doing too well. But for some reason, that's a big topic of discussion every single time I mention it. Every single bear market too. Like it's not like this is the first time I've had these discussions with people. I've had these discussions with like people on Twitter for like 3 bear markets now, where people are just like very upset because they either have a bag in something that has actually been going up, or because they're just like, just want to call me wrong or whatever. It's an odd thing every single time.
It'll keep happening, and you'll love it, Don.
Yeah, I think like the thing is like there is periods of times where you can trade altcoins quite well. But most of the time they're in the process of dumping, really, right? Like you have a couple weeks to a month or 2, maybe 3 months of altcoin outperformance, and then they're perpetually dumping. And those 2 or 3 months basically get people super excited about them, and then people get dumped on for the next year or 2. And that's been a repeating pattern over years and years in this market.
And will be, probably. I don't
Oh
see that
yeah.
changing anytime soon. But yeah,
I
that
mean,
altcoin discussion is obviously, like, the way it boils down, 9 times out of 10, is, hey, here's this general rule about altcoins. And then people say, well, here's an exception, so your rule is wrong. It's like, okay, well, we can't discuss anything if you argue using those
Yeah.
parameters, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I agree fully with you. Like everything looks like shit. There's a few that have a narrative, but it's the problem is that you can only stretch that narrative so far, right? I think the XRP narrative you can stretch quite a bit. Litecoin, I'm basically through with. I think I do like the chart, but it's getting too close to the halving, so that's getting too toxic for me to touch. Could see myself do one more play on it, as in like bet that this kind of like weekly triangle that we have going on with like you can draw a trend line from the lows at 77 upwards, and then like a high of 100, the resistance that's kind of been rejecting us. Like I could see myself do one more play or try one more play on this thing, just because the chart looks quite good in comparison to almost everything else, but it's getting too close. So like the only narrative that I have left that is playable is XRP, and that's an odd one, really. Like if you're relying on XRP to do well, you've gone wrong somewhere.
It's like, you're probably wondering how I ended up here, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough, Don. I think that's completely reasonable. Should we do some news related stuff and go over some headlines and some memes? But yeah, I think that's fairly comprehensive as far as the state of the market goes. Like, super mixed signals on BTC and ETH, with a bigger picture view of not entirely sure where the buyers are going to come from for the rest of the year once we're up 2x. The troubling thing about the S&P resistance, that even if you do get really bullish closes on BTC and ETH, you're buying them into risk on resistance, if you will. And altcoins are underperforming in BTC, ETH, and USD outside of those with short-term catalyst narratives, but those are few and far between. Is that fair?
Yep, perfect.
Cool. Right, let's get into it. The most agonizing part of the show, again, for everyone, is how I open these tabs, but thank you for being here nonetheless. And if you enjoy Casual Friday, leave us a like on these videos and leave us a comment. We read them all, and we appreciate all the YouTube native support. So, First one, Soros Fund Management CEO says crypto is ripe for TradFi takeover. And the quote was, crypto is here to stay, but the recent tumult provides an opportunity for traditional finance to take the lead, says Dawn Fitzpatrick, CEO of Soros Fund Management. Platforms like Binance and Coinbase would have benefited from having an adult in the room, she said, amid the SEC lawsuits against both platforms. That second claim, I'm not entirely sure I'm in agreement with. I think maybe in the past that's true, but we've gone over the sort of arc of Binance's development, how you sort of play allegedly in Minecraft more in the gray area early on to get a leg up, and then you clean up after the fact. Coinbase, I think, is they did some shitty, shady stuff. Again, that's a personal value judgment, not a claim. But in the bull market with some of their listings, I thought those were pretty predatory and just kind of bad faith. In my own personal twisted moral compass. But some of the dog token weird stuff listings they had, those Kobe threads and the insider trading on there and Coinbase NFT flopping, sure, that was pretty ugly, but in terms of, this is a publicly listed company. In terms of compliance, they obviously care, right? So I'm not sure the adult in the room argument applies as much to them. But yeah, what's your take on the whole, well, the crypto natives failed, so the TradFi needs to come and sweep it up and clean it up. I can understand the appeal, personally, of that type of argument, but I think it's one that I disagree with, because the track record and the history of suits coming in from traditional finance trying to fix crypto is fucking awful. Like, it's really bad. And actually, SBF was technically one of those suits. As a Jane Street type of quant whatever guy just comes in and builds from the ground up, and look where it got us. And even more colloquially, just a lot of the traders and the funds in the space who apply their boomer TradFi reasoning to it, they just don't get it, and they always underperform. I think it's got its own kind of unique culture, and I don't want to see it rebranded as just another TradFi takeover product. Although as crypto natives, they've done a pretty bad job as well, so I can see why people lean that way. I think the overall point is no one's coming to save you, right? The whole idea of there being this adult authority figure who's going to clean up this market and make it nice and efficient and orderly. I don't buy it personally, but it's nice that at least the vultures are circling, right? Because it means they care. People are paying attention to it, as opposed to in 2017. I'm sure you'll recall that it was literally a retail only market, and then when all of retail died, the prevailing wisdom was, well, it's over, right? Like that was it, because why would anyone serious touch this? So what do you think about all this?
I mean, I don't think they would have a better track record, to be honest. But also, it's kind of fucked up, right? That we have these. The way kind of Binance allegedly handled stuff early on is basically just like doing stuff on like borrowing basically good faith, and then like now repaying it by getting fucked, right? Like all of this bullshit that they kind of said, that you see in these documents, right? Like that's all come back to bite us in the ass, and they've made their profits in the last few years, right? So by doing whatever the fuck they've been doing, they're kind of like overall, I would say, making things difficult in a way, but also like they were able to build this kind of massive fortune just based on doing those kind of things. I don't know how I think about that. Like for me, it's scummy behavior, but I get where it comes from, and it's business. It kind of makes sense, right? Like if you just wanna dominate the field and you see a way to do it, you can do it. But it's not necessarily something that I'm particularly in agreement with. But yeah, now we just kind of have all of us just kind of have to sit through this shit together, because people couldn't play by the rules. And I don't necessarily think we needed Binance not to play by the rules, right? Like it's not like crypto would have gone nowhere if Binance didn't allegedly do whatever they were doing. They could have played by the rules and we still would have been fine, I think.
But the counter argument is precedent, right? Like Bittrex and Kraken and Coinbase.
Oh yeah,
Look,
but
you can play by the rules, you get fucked. You don't play by the rules, you get fucked.
but they got fucked because of Binance. Like that's the thing, right? Like Bittrex lost all of its customers to Binance.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
So kind of like by them doing this, they basically stole the customers from everyone that was trying to do it legitimately. And now we're in this kind of shit situation where like Binance is the only one left in town, and now the SEC is going after them, right? Like it's a little bit of a shit show, to be quite honest.
Yeah, that's true. I think as monopolies attract attention, right? Like everyone else
Yeah.
is dead, and your Binance had the biggest market share. You can see they're aware of it because there was a headline saying they don't want more market share, and people found that weird. It's like, no, that's not weird at all. Like at this point, it's just a target on your back, as we've seen. But yeah, it seems I agree with how you've sort of described history, but it seems like still presently, like at this moment, there's almost no incentive to even try to comply, right? Because you'll go broke, as we saw with Bittrex, and yes, Binance like basically flipping their entire audience and customer base is definitely a huge part of it. But like, if you're a crypto business now, you try to comply, it's expensive, you can't, and you'll lose users, and you'll still get fucked for trying, as we've seen with Coinbase, Kraken, etc. And you don't comply, maybe you have a chance of gaining some market share, but you're still going to get screwed down the line. So it's pretty terrible regulatory environment. But I agree that there is some sense of, you know, paying for our sins of the past with this stuff. Because definitely in the exchange space, it's very hard and fast rules until you get big enough, and then you clean it up later. It's the same in the influencer space, right? Like, you know, you take a certain market cycle, a period of time, you play hard and fast by the rules, and then you sort of try to peter out and do some charity work, or I don't know, reputation wash your past actions. So
I've seen that a lot. Yeah,
it's very common. Yeah,
it's a thing where people just kind of do scummy shit.
It works though. That's why they do
and make a bunch of money,
Yes.
right? Like it's quite funny when you see a bunch of people do scummy shit, make like 10 million, and then be like on Twitter and like, oh, I donated 500,000 to this and that, and everyone's like swooning over them because they're so charitable, and you're like,
Oh yeah,
they just stole 10 million from people. Now they're donating 500K back.
it's a good trade. 500K to make 10 million. You know, good risk reward.
Yeah, but that's just kind of how it works,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like this is the same. Like every single corporation in the world, or almost every single one, does this,
Oh,
right?
for
Where
sure.
they're just kind of like they exploit, and then they do something like charitable that doesn't cost them as much, and then everything's forgotten.
Oh yeah, this performative restitution, right?
Yeah, I absolutely hate it.
It's so bad. It's so bad. It's especially bad in crypto because most people don't even try, which is funny because they don't have to because there's no long-term memory in this place. The ones that do is just so blatant, especially if it involves like tokens and their audience in some capacity. And it's like, oh yeah, well this was really bad. We're not going to do it anymore. It's like, okay, so you concede that it was wrong. You concede that you made money, and you're not going to do it anymore because presumably you think it's wrong or you don't want to get caught again, whatever it may be. So presumably there's some penalty involved in that, right? Like either social or monetary, and there isn't, because the comments are all like, "Oh, you're such a good person for doing this and changing," but it's like they've kept all the money. Do you not see what's going on? Like, how seriously should I take your apology if your apology is at no cost to you at all? But yeah, that's happens in the exchange business. It's also a microcosm for individuals in the space, and yeah, it is what it is.
Exactly.
This part I really didn't like, and this entire regulatory arc is a total pain in the ass. You and I, of all people, a Brit and a German dude, have been bashing the SEC harder than most Americans on this show, it feels like. But this part kind of raised my procedural propriety eyebrow, because the quote goes, or the article headline is, Gary Gensler says, and this is a quote, "We don't need more digital currency," end quote, after Coinbase and Binance lawsuits. That seems inappropriate to me. Because I don't really personally care what Gary Gensler thinks in a sort of personal capacity as far as how much or how little crypto the country needs or doesn't need. That's not your job, right? Like, your mandate is to follow the laws set by the legislature and make sure that, you know, the sort of bodies that your agency oversees are in compliance as far as reasonably possible. But it's not your job to make either value judgments or normative judgments about how much or how little of crypto, for example, or anything else there should be. I don't want you to be a guy who has thoughts and opinions about these things. Like, you're a regulator. The legislature sets the laws and you're supposed to enforce them. That's it. That's where your mandate stops. And if you see this type of really aggressive posturing and going after what appear to be, in some cases, good faith crypto companies, and then at the same time you're adding your own personal sort of value judgment on top of that, it just seems to go beyond his mandate and seems improper to posture that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want my, like, more colloquially, I want my regulators to be just fucking by the book nerds who, like, don't care about how much or how little or what, you know, CFDs, futures, derivatives, whatever. Like, they're completely ambivalent, and they just follow whatever the legislature set them to do and whatever their mandate is. I don't like when regulators start to insert their personal opinion into this type of stuff, because that just seems like a dereliction of duty. And it's not supposed to be somewhere where you have that degree of like your personal views shouldn't spill over into you exercising your mandate. That just seemed completely out of order for me. And you can infer these things based on how they regulate and who they regulate. And I'm not saying that like it's reasonable to expect these people to be robots, but this seemed to me to be a bit of a odd overstep. Like, I don't know what the FCA thinks about crypto, for example, right? The Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. What they do is they do consultation papers where they hear from a bunch of experts and they publish those. And, you know, the government or, you know, Parliament is the one that legislates the actual laws. And that's what the FCA, you know, that's where the FCA derives their authority and the rules they enforce. But I don't know what the head of the FCA thinks about crypto. And I certainly hope that has no bearing on the type of enforcement action that we see, but it seems to be tits up in the US, where Gensler just clearly doesn't like it, says as much that he doesn't like it, and then that's also reflected in his agency's pattern of enforcement. That just seems completely fucking wrong, and again violates the type of procedural norms that you'd want to see in a functioning democracy. What do you think?
Yeah, 100% agreed. I mean, he just seems deranged, honestly, at this
Yeah,
point.
he's lost it, hasn't he?
Like completely gone. The thing is, like, crypto does deserve a lot of the shit that we're getting thrown, like that comes at us. It's just that they're throwing the shit at the wrong place, right? There's a shitload of stuff that they could go after that where I'd be like, well, good fucking job, right? Like, take these idiots out. But instead they go after what, like Coinbase, Binance. I mean, Binance, I get it. It's quite an easy target given the communications that they've had. And this is something that I've mentioned over the years, over and over and over again. Like, there's a reason why I'm blocked by CZ, right? I was like, this is just no conduct that you should be having, especially not public. And he blocked me for it, which was quite funny. But still, like, there's just a million better targets, right? Because there is actually law of there are actually a law of like securities in crypto. There are actually a lot of people breaking the law, and there are actually a lot of people that would very well deserve being kind of like properly investigated.
FTX, Luna, Celsius, Voyager, BlockFi. Like, how many of those were we protected from, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
On,
like, and then like now he's going completely off. Like, I mean, basically, what it feels like to me is he's trying to be a politician, and this is something that I fucking hate. That kind of spills over a little bit from America is this whole like making these people into celebrities of sorts, right? Like, no one in Germany or in the UK really knows who the fuck sits at these boards, right?
That's how it
Like,
should be, yeah.
like these are like you said, it's just nerds that you have no interaction with ever. Their opinion does not matter whatsoever, right? No one, like, there's not gonna be like a news agency that covers this shit day and night. Like, if anything, like a financial news agency that is like that 10 people read. But for some reason in America, it's always the fact that like all these politicians are also celebrities at the same time and are trying to be such. And it's very, very tiresome, and leads to kind of shitty behavior, really, right? Like, this should very much not be happening, in my opinion. Like, it's just completely overboard. But yeah, it is happening. I wonder how this is going to end for him. Like, in my opinion, he should go to jail for what he's doing. It might sound extreme, but like, he's trying to kill an industry instead of doing his fucking job, right? Like, he's trying to do everything he can to kill something, which very much isn't his job. So
Agreed
I don't know.
there.
I
Yeah.
really
think
don't
it ends
understand
badly because we're even now seeing pushback from the Democratic side, for whom crypto is like a very convenient bogeyman to poke at.
Yeah.
Because some of the people are just saying, well, look, the SEC is literally litigating, enforcing via litigation, right? Like, that's not how the agency is supposed to work. And so some of the politicians, even if they don't like crypto themselves, they certainly like due process, because they know what it's like when you're on the other end of it, and you don't want those agencies to act beyond the mandate given to them by and the processes given to them by Congress. So that I don't think it's going to end particularly well. I'm also, for once, sympathetic to the pseudo-conspiratorial, no longer pseudo-conspiratorial argument that this is essentially a personal vendetta after a period of what appears to be pretty embarrassing sort of personal venture with crypto, where specifically the two claims I'm relying on here is first that Gensler's SEC was pretty close with FTX. and they were discussing having different loopholes and carve-outs and special status and exemptions with the greatest sort of financial fraud of at least our time in crypto. So that's the first thing, and that's very embarrassing. And the second one now, slightly less so. I think the FTX one is the main one, but the second one is that, have you seen these claims that he wanted to be an informal advisor to Binance in 2019 or whatever at some point?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I've seen it, but I don't know how
that's
like
probably like
legit those
maybe
are.
5% if it's true, right? But the
Yeah.
big one is that the agency both missed out on catching the biggest blow-ups and the biggest frauds in the space in 2021 and what followed in 2022, and then having failed all of those household names that I mentioned, the ones they got close to and were willing to make exceptions and carve-outs for ended up being the biggest fraud of all. And so that's a really ugly legacy to leave, right? That you essentially failed completely by any reasonable metric, and that's without even getting into sort of ETFs and GBTC and all this other stuff. And so now you have to go out with a bang in some way, because if that's your legacy, that you were cozying up to the FTX while missing out on the biggest frauds, that's not very good. And so now I think this is like a personal vendetta, reputational risk management overcorrection that, okay, I'm in the shit. It's the last inning. I need to swing at something big to get a win here. And what bigger targets to go for than Binance and Coinbase? But that in itself is just such an egregious and unacceptable process. It's frankly embarrassing, to be honest. Just resign, mate. Fuck off.
Yeah,
Lizard
like
dickhead,
legit.
man.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, and the impact it's having is quite massive, right?
Yes.
Like, this is just setting back the US so far in terms of crypto development, which is, I mean, if you believe the claims that the crypto people make, which I think some of them are actually quite reasonable, like this could be like a big sector in the future. And if you consider that that's all gonna go somewhere else, that's a big loss. And yeah, I just complete and utter mismanagement of something that is actually just very straightforward if done right.
Yes.
Right. So I don't know. It's frustrating to watch, honestly.
It's so ugly. And it's weird for us as sort of Europeans seeing such a politicized enforcement agency from the financial side. Like, I shouldn't know who Gensler is. I don't know who the UK's Gensler is, right?
Me neither.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, I think that's really all there is to say on that point. But look, even from the American perspective, the brain drain from there sucks. The fact that companies are going to be moving offshore and have already sucks. But also, even if you don't have like a normative view on whether crypto is good or bad, you should at least be neutral, right? In the spirit of whatever the purported values of free enterprise and capitalism and freedom, TM, whatever that means. You should at least allow like a decent margin of appreciation for the tech to exist in the US if people want it. But taking an active position on it just seems like such a almost un-American thing to do. So yeah, dude, I wonder how many minutes cumulatively we've spent bagging on Gensler on Casual Friday, because even before all this stuff, we were swinging pretty hard, and we generally don't really care about. And this is the least exciting as traders, at least the regulatory legal side. But it's just been so egregious that you almost can't ignore it as someone, like, I don't know, with a functioning brain, I suppose. I found myself in the camp of some unlikely allies when I speak ill of Gensler. Cool. The other two headlines, I've got like a few other ones, but the ones pertaining to the SEC is obviously the big news that Coinbase was sued by the SEC one day after regulator sues Binance, and then obviously the breaking one that US SEC sues Binance and the CEO for breaking securities rules. I think we've covered those pretty comprehensively at this point. I do want to ask about what does your sort of decision matrix look like, or your modeling in terms of likely outcomes? Because on the extreme end, like the extremely positive end, it's something like BitMEX style. Yes, the DOJ gets involved and it's about as ugly as you can get, but the market essentially shakes it off and trends higher. And now that all the bad news, regulatory stuff has been sufficiently priced in, we've had the worst of the worst. That overhang sort of goes away. At least it did then, and number go up, right? And then on the other end, it's basically this is the industry killer. This is the end. Binance International is targeted also, even though it's only Binance US, because the allegations of commingling that they aren't two separate entities, and that this is if the US kills crypto, then everywhere else is just gonna. It affects all jurisdictions in the market sort of globally, even if the enforcement action is originates in the US. And then somewhere in the middle are all the boring outcomes, like either slap on the wrist, or it just takes a while and they fight the lawsuits and win on some points and lose on others, and the procedure takes months and years, so on and so forth. Do you have any? I mean, what do you think? Do you think about the outcomes in those terms, or do you just not care and going to look at the chart volume, etc.?
I mean, honestly, if XRP can put up a good fight, and I mean, I've seen a few lawyer types that have been saying that there's a good chance that XRP is actually going to win the case. If XRP can do that, I think Binance can too. They're
Yes.
significantly more rich, like significantly richer. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I don't think they're going to necessarily lose this, especially given like we've talked about, it's like a little bit of an overreach. I think it's going to be quite the pricey thing. Like all of these comments that, I mean, there's documents out there that you can read on what people working at Binance have been saying or have said in 2018 about Binance. I think that's going to be quite costly, but I don't think it's going to kill anything. So yeah, it's just basically it's wasting our time and making the inevitable kind of happen a little bit later, which is basically that crypto goes up. I think yeah, I don't think it's a killer at all. I don't think it's necessarily like in the scope justified. So I think it's going to go away, but it might take a while.
I'm glad that it's here in a rip off the band-aid sort of way, right? Because we sort of knew that this was looming over us after what happened to the industry in 2022, and even some of the stuff early this year. So the question of regulatory enforcement and action was a question of when, not if. And if the market's going to be, this summer lull and, up from the lows and just shitty price action in general, I'm a huge fan of front loading all the garbage and grouping it together as much as possible, and just to kind of have the best chance of getting it over with, instead of having these like either a prolonged process or having it drip fed where every 2-4 months you have like more shit news. I'd rather just just come punch me in the face immediately rather than drip feed this stuff. So at least that's something. But I'm not smart enough to have a whole, what are the likely outcomes, legal probabilities, and then price impact of those probabilities. Like, the market's going to do what the market's going to do, right? Like, the market can nuke off of amazing news that seems really bullish, and the market can pump off of some, in the past, like Binance getting hacked or DOJ going off after Arthur Hayes. Those were like trend-forming breakout type of things. So clearly there's some space for the market to do what the market does, and not be completely tied and part dependent to good litigation outcome equals number go up, bad litigation number equals number go down. I don't think it's that simple, especially given the magnitude and the likely time period that this will take.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
We'll see, Don. We'll see. We'll share a jail cell or whatever, worst case, right? The technical roundup block. There is something I wanted to ask you about, and it's the screenshot that's going around in terms of like a crypto sentiment check, and it's got 4 pieces of media on it. This one is from Fiscantes. I saw one from Zach Vol as well. So the first one is Jason, that all-in podcast. You know, the Solana guy who was like, "Oh, you're trying to dump your Solana," like really famous VC in America. His tweet was, "If you're in crypto, pivot to AI." You have Jim Cramer saying, "I've had it with Coinbase and don't get me started on Binance." You have Chamath, another all-in podcast guy, saying crypto is dead in America. And then you have Vox saying now might be a good time to consider quitting crypto. And so this is kind of being, and all in a very short time of each other, obviously. And so this is kind of being paraded around as the go-to sentiment check for the market, as to look how bad it is, this is bottom things, etc. You're someone who likes sentiment. Certainly pay attention to it. What's your sense of whether this is correct, and I guess sentiment in the market more broadly?
I don't think it's necessarily as impactful as stuff we've had before. Like, I think it's nothing burger basically, and I think it basically, the comments that we've been getting are for good reason, right? Like back in the day, it wasn't. This is kind of the whole thing that I have with crypto, right? So when we were crashing 2017-18, the reason why I was like so certain it was gonna go back up again was because all the reasons that people made up for this to just be over were kind of bullshit in my eyes. Like, oh, like it's just fat, whatever. Like, that's just crap, right? Well, like, it went up, it went down, it's a bubble, it popped, but there's still something there, right? So I was like, okay, I think this is gonna come back. And nowadays, like, the reason why these people kind of comment on the whole space like this is because, I mean, there's been massive fraud, there's been massive kind of like criminal action basically going on, and it's all blown up, right? So you'd kind of expect this commentary. I'd be shocked if we didn't get it. So I don't think this is necessarily like a sentiment or we're at the bottom kind of thing. It's more like, hey, a bunch of bad shit happened and people took notice because we were on the big stages when it did happen. And now people hate on it because a bunch of bad shit happened. I mean, that just kind of makes sense. Like I don't see how that is like haha, they're so bearish at the bottom thing. It's more of a like, haha, they're so bearish because we fucked up so massively that it just kind of makes sense to be negative about crypto. Like, honestly, I don't think the two are like even comparable, really. Like, there's good reasons why they post it.
Yeah, I agree. And I also put a lot less weight on this type of stuff if it's not supported by price action. Like, if we'd nuked to the yearly open or something, and we're seeing this stuff come out, then I'd pay more attention to it. Because it's like a direct emotional reaction to price. And that tends to provide a lot more signal. Whereas in this case, we're still basically 2x from the lows. And this just seems more a response to the regulatory action and the severity and the magnitude of it that we're seeing. So for me, at least, I don't know what you think of this. If I'm going to pay attention to sentiment type of stuff in terms of what the normies are thinking or tourists are thinking, I want it to be correspondent with price action, because that's when those feels really come out. If it's just a response to news or whatever and prices diverging, I generally find it less interesting. I want to see euphoria with a euphoria candle and doom with a doom candle, not those feelings with a choppy market.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if anything, all of these sentiment posts, right, talking about haha, look at these idiots, are more of a sentiment indicator than actually those people.
Oh, here we go. The 4D chess is out, Don.
I mean, legit, like, just a bunch of people like trying to hold on to hope. I think 15, 16K was the low. I don't think we're gonna go lower than that. But yeah, I think the sentiment, if anything, is on the wrong side here, not on the right side. But we'll see.
We'll see. I do want to end on something slightly more jovial, Don, because God knows the last few weeks we haven't. So this was from Genesis. They posted, I saw them tweet a market commentary post. And I was like, oh, well, this will be interesting to see what they say. Because obviously they do a lot of trading over at Genesis. A lot of loans to 3AC as well, but a lot of trading also. So I thought I'd read this. And I don't know if you saw this come across your feed, Don, but people started retweeting it, saying it's just some of the most nonsensical, superfluous, verbose stuff they've read. And I use the word superfluous, verbose because the whole sort of tongue-in-cheek, because the whole thing is it's some of the most opaque English I've ever read as far as market commentary goes. Let me just read you the first paragraph. This week's sweeping regulatory pronouncements saw crypto realized volatility begin to rear its head. After seeming months of coiling in an ornery, reptilian rip-rap price action, the successive Monday and Tuesday swoon saw tandem on the back of Coinbase, Binance and Coinbase headlines preempted consternation, head-scratching, and if nothing else, a recognition that the asset class remains habitually prone to lurid gaps in price action. And then the third paragraph, that resounding rebound higher in gappy, syncopated sweeps, which took Bitcoin all the way back through 27K, seemed to validate banal perceptions that a full frontal barrage of enforcement action on the asset class could yet be a catalyst for further downside. I mean...
I actually have no idea what
found this so people were straight up roasting it. And also bear in mind, this commentary came out like after the move had already taken place, so this was like yesterday, also June the 8th. This was yesterday after all this stuff had happened, and it's literally like 5-6 very short paragraphs just like that, and so people were just roasting them for being completely obscure and like this is just some chat GPT shit. And I found it hilarious as well. And just the contrast, because to be fair, I like to meme on Twitter, and I also appreciate it when I got memed. And so I commented saying, yeah, I had the same reaction, because I think Clark said that it was some of the worst stuff he's ever read, or at least like, why the fuck are you using this type of language? And then someone said, oh, well, look, Cred, aren't you guilty of using this type of language? And so I just want to bring you Technical Roundup from Tuesday, which was published on, well, the day before the move, right? Or the day of the move. So this is on the 6th of June, not the 8th of June, as the market was dumping. This is what Technical Roundup had to say. The core thesis is as follows. Insiders speculated ahead of the Binance news, and the market dumped upon release. Non-insiders sold on the news and likely added their positioning with Coinbase news the very next day. The market's reaction to the second headline was more muted. In other words, the non-insiders are late and will likely get squeezed out by a move higher. Like, look, there's no reptilian riprap in our sort of analysis, and maybe we're not as smart to talk about sort of Vega and options and gamma surface and realized volatility and near dated straddles, but which one are you going to listen to? So I just found that to be quite entertaining, because I thought that maybe people were exaggerating in terms of how bad the language used was in this piece, and then I read it and thought, holy fuck, this is so jarring, frankly.
Yeah.
But I think it takes a really special mind to write something like this, especially after the fact. Like, if you're gonna hindsight post and make it like that, yeah, God help Genesis, I suppose. But I just thought it was quite funny, just the article itself, the language used, the response to it, and then to compare and contrast it with good old technical roundup.
Yeah. By the way, sign up to it if you haven't already.
Yes, trletter.com is our free weekly newsletter, where we also write about reptilian riprap, or don't, I suppose.
Better not. If we start writing like that, it's over.
Oh, it's fully over. Yeah, dude, we should definitely try to make like a Chat GPT version of it and see if people pick up on it. That'd be interesting.
Fun,
that'd be an interesting experiment. That's all I've got, Don. A solid hour, 20 minutes, but I think we've covered most of it. Anything from your end you want to talk about?
Nah, I think it's just time to let the market do its thing, and once that's done, we can start being excited again. And I'd love to be excited again. I'd love to be proven wrong and see this thing go up in a daily candle by 20%, so I can buy the next one. It goes up another 50. I'd love that. Until then, I'm gonna be a hater, or at least like close to it. Which to me, anyway, if I'm a hater, means I'm just not in the market. I'm not shorting anyway.
That sounds good. Nothing from my end. Thank you for listening to Casual Friday. Leave a like on this video. Make sure to check out the sponsor of the show, WooX. Links available in the description below. Long form article there. And then if you want to sign up, that is also all in the description. Thank you from us. Have an excellent weekend, and we will see you next week.